As she dusted the photo frame in the Millionaire's office, the cleaning lady saw a picture of her missing mother beside him. She froze. What she said left him speechless. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Richard Whitmore's corner office, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany desk. Emily Carter moved quietly around the room, her cleaning cartwheels barely whispering against the marble floor. She'd been doing the same routine for 2 years now, arriving at 6 a.m. sharp, working her way through the executive suites of Whitmore Industries before the real world woke up. At 28, Emily had perfected the art of being invisible. She knew exactly how to clean around important papers without disturbing them, how to dust expensive artwork without leaving fingerprints, and most importantly, how to move through the lives of the wealthy without them even noticing she existed. It was a survival skill she'd learned the hard way. "Chloe, baby, Mommy's gotta go to work early today," she'd whispered to her 8-year-old daughter that morning. Kissing her forehead as she slept, the little girl had stirred, mumbling something about pancakes for breakfast. Emily's heart had clenched. Pancakes were a weekend luxury they couldn't afford on a Tuesday. Now, as she carefully dusted the ornate picture frames lining Richard's bookshelf, Emily let her mind wander to the bills waiting at home. Grandma Margaret's medication had gone up again, and Chloe needed new school shoes. The ones she had were starting to show holes, and kids could be cruel about things like that. Richard Whitmore himself was a mystery to Emily. She'd seen him maybe a dozen times in 2 years, always rushing past like she was just another piece of furniture. He was 52, according to the business magazines scattered around his office, with steel gray hair and the kind of sharp jawline that probably made women swoon back in his younger days. Not that Emily paid attention to such things. Men like Richard Whitmore lived in a different universe entirely. She picked up an antique silver frame from the corner of his desk, planning to dust beneath it. The frame was heavier than expected, ornately carved with what looked like Italian craftsmanship. As she lifted it, her cleaning rag caught on the corner of his desk blotter. Everything happened in slow motion. The frame slipped from her fingers, tumbling toward the marble floor. Emily lunged forward, trying to catch it, but her knee knocked against the desk chair. The frame hit the ground with a sharp crack, the glass spider webbing across the photograph inside. "No, no, no," Emily whispered, dropping to her knees. Mr. Whitmore would fire her for sure. She couldn't afford to lose this job, not with Chloe and Grandma Margaret depending on her. She carefully picked up the frame, shaking the loose glass into her palm. That's when she saw the photograph clearly for the first time. The world stopped spinning. The picture was old, maybe from the mid-90s based on the fashion and color quality. It showed a young man with dark hair and laughing eyes, his arms wrapped around a radiant young woman on what looked like a beach. They were both tan and happy, clearly head over heels in love. The man was unmistakably a younger Richard Whitmore. Same jawline, same confident smile. But it was the woman that made Emily's blood turn to ice. The woman in the photograph was her mother, Isabella Carter, 20 years old and absolutely glowing. Was kissing Richard Whitmore on what looked like Miami Beach. Emily would recognize that face anywhere. She had the same dark eyes, the same delicate nose, the same wild curls that never wanted to behave. Her mother, who had died in a car accident when Emily was 12. Her mother, who had never once mentioned knowing anyone named Richard Whitmore. Her mother, who had always been evasive about Emily's father, saying only that he was a good man who couldn't be in their lives. Emily's hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the frame again. Questions flooded her mind like a dam bursting. When was this taken? How long had they been together? Why had her mother never told her? And the biggest question of all, was Richard Whitmore her father? She stared at the photograph, searching for similarities. The nose, maybe. The stubborn set of the jaw. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, just like hers did. "Oh my God," she whispered to the empty office. "Oh my God. Oh my God." Memories came flooding back. Conversations with her mother that had never quite made sense. The way Isabella would sometimes stare off into the distance with this incredibly sad expression. How she'd always insisted that Emily's father was successful and would love you if he knew about you. The mysterious envelope Isabella had left with Grandma Margaret, with strict instructions not to open it until Emily turned 28. Emily had turned 28 3 months ago. The envelope was still sitting unopened in Margaret's dresser drawer because they'd both been too afraid of what secrets it might contain. Now Emily thought she might know. The sound of the office door opening made her jump so violently that she banged her elbow against the desk. Richard Whitmore himself walked in, talking rapidly into his phone about quarterly projections and market volatility. He was wearing an expensive navy suit and looked every inch the successful businessman he was. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw Emily kneeling on his floor, holding his broken picture frame. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, his voice careful and controlled. He hung up and stared at her. What happened here? Emily scrambled to her feet, still clutching the frame. Her heart was beating so fast she was sure he could hear it. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Whitmore. I was cleaning and I accidentally knocked over your picture. I'll pay for the frame, I promise. I know it looks expensive, but I can make payments." "It's fine," he said, but his eyes were fixed on the photograph in her hands. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or pain. "Just be more careful next time." Emily knew she should hand over the frame and get back to work. She should apologize again and disappear before she made things worse. But the words came tumbling out before she could stop them. "This woman in the picture," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Her name was Isabella Carter. Richard went very still. "What did you say?" "Isabella Carter. She was my mother." Emily's voice was stronger now, even though her whole body was trembling. "She died when I was 12, in a car accident. But before she died, she told me something about my father. She said he was a good man who didn't know I existed, but that he would love me if he did." Richard's face had gone completely white. He reached out like he was going to steady himself against his desk. "She left me a letter," Emily continued, the words pouring out now like water through a broken dam. "To be opened when I turned 28. I've been too scared to read it. But now I think I know what it says." "Isabella," Richard whispered, and the way he said her mother's name, with such pain and longing, told Emily everything she needed to know. "You're my father, aren't you?" she asked, and the question hung in the air between them like a live wire. Richard Whitmore, the man who had never noticed her in 2 years of cleaning his office, stared at her with eyes that suddenly looked exactly like her own. Richard's legs gave out, and he sank into his leather chair like a man who'd just been told his entire life was a lie, which, Emily realized, was probably exactly how he felt. "Isabella," he said again, his voice cracking on the name. "You said she died in a car accident." Emily nodded, setting the broken frame carefully on his desk. 15 years ago, she was coming home from her night shift at the hospital. She was a nurse. The police said she fell asleep at the wheel. Richard buried his face in his hands. When he looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed. "I never knew. God help me. I never knew she was pregnant. She tried to tell you." The words came out more accusatory than Emily had intended. At least that's what she said before she died. She said she tried to reach you, but I was already married. Richard's voice was flat, hollow. "My parents, they arranged everything. I was 22 and stupid enough to think I had a choice. Isabella and I, we were together for almost 2 years. I loved her more than I'd ever loved anything in my life." Emily felt tears prick her eyes. All those nights she'd wondered about her father, imagined him as some heartless playboy who'd abandoned her mother. The reality was somehow worse. He genuinely loved Isabella, but had been trapped by circumstances. "Tell me about her," Richard said suddenly. "What was she like, as a mother, I mean?" Emily smiled through her tears. "She was amazing. She worked double shifts at 3 different hospitals to keep us afloat, but she never missed a school play or a parent-teacher conference. She'd sing to me when I had nightmares. These old Spanish lullabies her grandmother taught her, and she never, ever made me feel like I was a burden, even though I know raising me alone couldn't have been easy." Richard winced like she'd struck him. "She shouldn't have had to do it alone. She loved you. You know," Emily said softly, "even at the end when she was dying in that hospital bed, she told me my father was a good man. She made me promise not to hate you for not being there." Before Richard could respond, the office door burst open. A woman in her early 50s swept in, perfectly coiffed and wearing a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than Emily made in 6 months. This had to be Adriana Whitmore. Emily had seen her picture in the society pages often enough. "Darling, your secretary said you were in an important meeting." But I simply had to. Adriana's voice trailed off when she spotted Emily. Her eyes took in the cleaning uniform, the broken picture frame, and the tears on both their faces. Something calculating flickered across her expression. I see. How interesting. Adriana, Richard said, his voice strained. This is Emily Carter. She's Isabella's daughter. Adriana finished smoothly, and Emily felt her blood freeze. Yes, I can see the resemblance. She has her mother's eyes. Richard shot to his feet. You knew. All this time, you knew. Adriana examined her perfectly manicured nails. I suspected, when I heard through the grapevine that Isabella Carter had died. I had my people do some research. A daughter born 9 months after you two broke up. It wasn't exactly rocket science. And you said nothing. Richard's voice was deadly quiet. What was I supposed to say? Congratulations, darling. You have a bastard child with your ex-girlfriend. I thought it was better to let sleeping dogs lie. Adriana's smile was razor sharp. Though I must admit, I am curious how our little Emily ended up working for us. What are the odds? Emily found her voice. You hired me. Not directly, of course. I have people who handle such things. But when I learned you were struggling financially, caring for an elderly grandmother, raising a daughter alone, well, it seemed like the charitable thing to do. Give you honest work. Let you earn your way in the world. The implication hit Emily like a slap. Adriana had known exactly who she was, and had been playing some kind of twisted game for 2 years. Why? Insurance, my dear. Richard has always been sentimental about Isabella. I thought it might be useful to have a reminder of her close by, just in case he ever got any foolish ideas about the past. You're sick, Emily breathed. I'm practical, Adriana corrected, which is more than I can say for either of you. The office door opened again, and 2 young people entered. Emily recognized them from photos around the office. Patrick and Constance Whitmore, Richard's children with Adriana. Patrick was 25, tall and lean with his father's build, but his mother's cold eyes. Constance was 23, prettier than her mother, but with a warmth in her expression that suggested she'd inherited more from her father's side. Dad, Mom said you needed us here for some kind of family meeting. Patrick's voice was casual, but his eyes sharpened when he saw Emily. Who's this? This, Adriana said before Richard could answer, is your half-sister. The silence that followed was deafening. Patrick's face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked dangerously like anger. Half-sister, Emily Carter, Richard said quietly. She's Isabella's daughter. Constance gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Patrick's face darkened. Let me get this straight, Patrick said, his voice tight with controlled rage. You had an affair, got some nurse pregnant, and now she's here to what? Claim her piece of the inheritance. I didn't know, Richard exploded. I never knew Isabella was pregnant. If you had what? Patrick shot back. You would have left Mom, destroyed our family for some cleaning lady and her bastard daughter. Patrick. Constance looked horrified. That's awful. But Patrick was just getting started. This is convenient, isn't it? Dad's getting older, starting to think about his legacy, and suddenly his long-lost daughter shows up with the perfect sob story. Poor little Emily, working as a janitor, struggling to make ends meet. How much do you want? Emily's temper flared. I don't want anything from you people. Right, that's why you're here with some sob story about a dead mother and a mysterious photograph. That's enough, Richard said sharply. But Patrick wasn't finished. How do we even know she's telling the truth? Anyone could claim to be your daughter. Where's the DNA test? Where's the proof? The proof, said a voice from the doorway, is in the letter. Everyone turned. Margaret Carter stood in the doorway, looking small and frail, but with steel in her voice. Emily's heart lurched. What was her grandmother doing here? Grandma, what are you doing? Margaret walked slowly into the room, her cane tapping against the marble floor. I came because it's time. Mija, time to tell the truth. She reached into her purse and pulled out a yellowed envelope. Isabella left this for you, to be opened when you turn 28. But I think everyone needs to hear what's inside. Richard stared at the envelope like it might explode. What does it say? Margaret's eyes were sad but determined. It says that Isabella tried to reach you 17 times before Emily was born. She called your office, wrote letters, even came to your house once. But somehow, none of her messages ever got through. All eyes turned to Adriana, whose face had gone carefully blank. And, Margaret continued, her voice growing stronger, it says that someone was making sure those messages never reached you. Someone who wanted Isabella to disappear from your life forever. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Someone, Margaret said, looking directly at Adriana, who might have had reasons to want Isabella gone permanently. The tension in Richard's office was thick enough to cut with a knife. Adriana's composure had cracked just slightly, a muscle twitching in her jaw as she stared at Margaret's weathered hands holding that yellowed envelope. "That's quite an accusation, Mrs. Carter," Adriana said, her voice silk over steel. "I hope you have more than the fevered imaginings of a dying woman to back it up." Margaret's eyes flashed with surprising fire. Isabella wasn't fevered when she wrote this. She was heartbroken, but she was lucid, and she documented everything. Richard stepped forward, his hand trembling as he reached for the envelope. "May I?" Margaret nodded and placed it in his hands. The paper was soft with age, and Emily could see her mother's careful handwriting on the front. For Emily Marie Carter, on her 28th birthday. "With all my love, Mama." Richard's breath caught when he saw the date, just 3 days before Isabella's death. "Should I read it aloud?" he asked quietly. Emily nodded, not trusting her voice around them. The Whitmore family had gone silent, even Patrick seeming to understand this was bigger than his inheritance concerns. Richard opened the envelope with surgical care and unfolded several pages of Isabella's neat handwriting. He cleared his throat and began to read. "My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're old enough to understand the truth about your father. His name is Richard James Whitmore, and he was the love of my life." Richard's voice cracked, and he had to pause. Constance moved closer to him, her hand gentle on his arm. "We met in college," Richard continued reading. "He was studying business. I was in pre-med for 2 years. We were inseparable. We talked about marriage, about the future, about the children we'd have together. You were conceived in love. Mija, never doubt that." Emily wiped away tears as her mother's voice seemed to fill the room through Richard's words. But Richard's family had other plans. The Whitmores were old money, but they'd made some bad investments. The Collins family offered to save them from bankruptcy, but only if Richard married their daughter Adriana. When Richard told me about the arrangement, we both cried. We thought we'd find a way around it, but Richard's hands were shaking now. "But by the time I found out you existed, I was already pregnant and Richard was engaged. I tried to tell him. Emily, God knows I tried." The letter went on to detail 17 different attempts Isabella had made to contact Richard, phone calls to his office where secretaries claimed he was unavailable, letters sent to his home that were returned unopened, even a desperate trip to his engagement party, where security had turned her away at the door. "The last time I tried," Richard read, his voice barely a whisper. "I was 8 months pregnant and could barely walk. I went to Whitmore Industries and begged the receptionist to let me see Richard for just 5 minutes. The woman looked at my condition with such disgust and told me that Mr. Whitmore didn't associate with women like me," she said. "If I came back, she'd call the police." Adriana had gone very pale, but her chin remained defiantly raised. "I gave up after that," the letter continued. "I realized that Richard's new life had no place for us, but I want you to know, Emily, that your father is a good man who was trapped by circumstances. If he had known about you, he would have moved heaven and earth to be in your life." Richard looked up from the letter, tears streaming down his face. "There's more, but it's personal messages for Emily." Emily nodded, understanding. The rest was between her and her mother. The silence stretched until Patrick exploded. "So what? So some woman claims Dad is Emily's father and that Mom kept them apart. That doesn't prove anything." "Patrick," Constance said sharply, "show some respect." "Respect for what? For some stranger who's trying to worm her way into our family. For someone who's been lying to us for 2 years, cleaning our offices while plotting to claim what's ours." Emily's temper finally snapped. "I never asked for any of this. You think I wanted to find out that the man who's ignored me for 2 years is my father? You think I wanted to learn that my mother died believing she wasn't good enough for your precious family? Then leave, Patrick shot back. Go back to your little life and pretend this never happened. Patrick, enough. Richard's voice thundered through the office. Emily is my daughter. That makes her your sister, whether you like it or not. Half-sister? Patrick corrected coldly. And I don't have to like anything about this situation. Constance stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. Emily, I'm sorry about Patrick. He's protective of family, but he goes about it the wrong way. She looked directly at Emily, and her smile was genuinely warm. I always wanted a sister. This isn't how I imagined it happening, but I'm glad you're here. Emily felt a rush of gratitude toward this young woman who was being kinder to her than she had any right to expect. As touching as this family reunion is, Adriana interjected, we need to discuss practicalities, Emily. What exactly do you want from us? I told you, I don't want anything. Everyone wants something, dear. Money, recognition, a piece of the Whitmore empire. Richard stepped between them. Adriana, that's enough. Emily is part of this family now. Is she? Adriana's smile was razor sharp. Because I seem to recall that Richard Whitmore is already married with 2 legitimate children. Adding a third to the mix could be complicated. The threat in her voice was unmistakable. Emily suddenly understood that Adriana saw her as more than just an inconvenience. She saw her as a weapon that could be used against Richard. I need to go, Emily said suddenly. I need to think about all this. Emily, wait, Richard said, but she was already heading for the door. I have to pick up Chloe from school, and I need to process this. She paused at the doorway. The letter, can I? Richard handed it to her immediately. Of course, it's yours. As Emily left, she heard Patrick's voice behind her. This isn't over. I won't let some opportunist destroy our family. But it was Adriana's response that chilled her to the bone. Oh, Patrick, you have no idea what's really at stake here. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Emily picked up Chloe from school, helped Margaret with her evening medications, and tried to pretend that her world hadn't been turned completely upside down. But every time she looked at her daughter's innocent face, she saw echoes of Richard Whitmore's features. Every time she looked at Margaret, she wondered what other secrets her grandmother had been keeping. That evening, after Chloe was asleep, Emily sat at their small kitchen table with Margaret and finished reading her mother's letter. The personal parts were just as heartbreaking as she'd expected. Isabella's hopes and dreams for Emily's future, her regrets about the past, and her final words of love. But there was something else, a postscript that made Emily's blood run cold. P.S. If anything happens to me, know that it wasn't an accident. Adriana Collins has too much to lose to let the past stay buried. Be careful, my love. Be very careful. Emily looked up at Margaret, who was watching her with worried eyes. Grandma, Emily whispered. What exactly happened the night Mom died? Margaret's face crumpled. I've been wondering that for 15 years. Mija, your mother was a good driver, never reckless, and she'd just gotten some news that day. News that had her excited about the future for the first time in years. What kind of news? She'd found out where Richard worked. She was planning to try one more time to tell him about you. Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. She died on her way to see him. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was just beginning. 3 days had passed since the revelation in Richard's office, and Emily was struggling to maintain any semblance of normalcy. She'd called in sick to work. The thought of cleaning Richard's office while processing the fact that he was her father felt surreal beyond comprehension. Instead, she'd spent the time researching everything she could find about her mother's death. The official police report was frustratingly brief. Isabella Carter, 32, single vehicle accident on Highway 95 at 11:47 p.m. Vehicle left the roadway and struck a tree. Driver pronounced dead at the scene. Preliminary investigation suggested the driver had fallen asleep at the wheel. Case closed. But Emily's mother had been a night shift nurse for years. She was used to driving late at night, and she'd never had so much as a parking ticket. The more Emily read, the more questions arose. Her phone buzzed. Richard's name appeared on the screen, and Emily's heart skipped. He'd been calling daily, but she hadn't been ready to talk. Today felt different. Hello, she answered tentatively. Emily, His voice was warm with relief. "Thank you for answering. How are you holding up?" "I'm processing. It's a lot to take in. I can only imagine. Listen, I've been doing some research of my own, and I think we need to talk. There are things about your mother's death that don't add up." Emily's pulse quickened. "What kind of things?" "The kind that require a private investigator. Would you be willing to meet? Maybe somewhere neutral, away from my office." An hour later, Emily found herself sitting across from Richard in a quiet corner booth at Rosie's Diner, a place so far from his usual world that she doubted anyone would recognize him. He looked different in jeans and a simple button-down shirt. Younger, more approachable, more like a father than a businessman. "I hired someone," Richard said without preamble, sliding a manila folder across the table. "James Mitchell, former Miami PD detective. He's been looking into Isabella's accident." Emily's hands trembled as she opened the folder. Inside were photographs of the accident scene, copies of the police report, and several pages of handwritten notes. "The first thing that bothered him," Richard continued, "was the timing. Isabella left the hospital at 11:15 p.m. The accident happened at 11:47. That's a 32-minute drive that should have taken 15 minutes, tops. Maybe she stopped somewhere. That's what we thought, but Mitchell checked every gas station, convenience store, and restaurant along her route. No one remembers seeing her that night." Emily studied the crime scene photos. Her mother's car wrapped around a massive oak tree. What else? The skid marks. Or rather, the lack of them, if someone falls asleep at the wheel. They usually hit the brakes when they wake up, even if it's too late. Isabella's car shows no evidence of braking before impact. A chill ran down Emily's spine. "You think someone tampered with her car?" "I think someone wanted it to look like an accident." Richard's voice was grim. "Mitchell found something else. Isabella had called your grandmother that night around 10:30. Margaret said she sounded excited, said she had news that would change everything." Emily remembered Margaret mentioning this, but now it took on a sinister significance. "What kind of news?" "We think she'd found a way to contact me. Mitchell discovered that, earlier that day, Isabella had been to the offices of Hartwell & Associates, the law firm that handled my family's legal affairs back then. The pieces were starting to come together, and Emily didn't like the picture they were forming. Someone found out she was trying to reach you, and someone made sure she never got the chance." They were interrupted by the arrival of Richard's phone buzzing with a text. His face darkened as he read it. "What is it?" "Adriana, she wants to meet with you, says she has information about your mother that you need to hear." Emily's blood chilled. "What kind of information?" "She won't say." "But Emily..." Richard reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "I don't trust her. After reading Isabella's letter, after seeing how she reacted to your existence, I'm starting to think my wife is capable of things I never imagined." Before Emily could respond, her phone rang. Margaret's number flashed on the screen. "Grandma, what's wrong?" Margaret's voice was shaky with fear. "Emily, someone was here, in the house. They went through Isabella's things." Emily's heart stopped. "Are you okay? Where's Chloe?" "She's with me. We're both fine. But Emily, they took something. The box where I kept your mother's medical records from the hospital. The papers from when she died." Richard was already standing, throwing money on the table. "We're coming over," Emily said. "Don't touch anything else. We'll be right there." Margaret and Chloe's small apartment looked like a tornado had hit it. Drawers pulled out, papers scattered everywhere, cushions overturned. But it wasn't random destruction. This had been a targeted search. They knew exactly where to look, Margaret said, wrapping her arms around herself. "Went straight to Isabella's memory box in my bedroom closet. Took the medical files but left everything else. Her jewelry, her photos, even the cash I keep for emergencies." Richard was examining the forced lock on the front door. "Professional work. Whoever did this knows what they're doing." 8-year-old Chloe sat quietly on the couch, her eyes wide but not crying. Emily's heart ached for her daughter, who was experiencing all this chaos without understanding why. "Mama, why did the bad people come to great-grandma's house?" Chloe asked. Emily knelt in front of her daughter, choosing her words carefully. "Some people are looking for something that belonged to your grandmother Isabella. But don't worry, baby. We're going to make sure you and great-grandma are safe." Richard surprised Emily by crouching down next to Chloe. Hi there. I'm Richard. I'm a friend of your mom's. Chloe studied him with the serious expression she got when meeting new adults. You have the same eyes as Mama. Richard's breath caught, and Emily saw tears threaten to spill over. This was his granddaughter, and he was meeting her for the first time under these circumstances. Do I? Richard said softly. That's pretty cool. Grandma, what was in those medical files? Emily asked, trying to focus on the immediate threat. Margaret looked uncomfortable. Things that never made sense to me. The autopsy report, mostly. And some notes from Dr. Ramirez. He was the emergency room doctor who treated Isabella when they brought her in. I thought she died at the scene. That's what they told everyone. But she was still alive when the ambulance got there. She died 20 minutes later in the air. Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. And according to Dr. Ramirez's notes, she wasn't unconscious from the accident. She was conscious and trying to say something. Richard had gone very still. What was she trying to say? She kept repeating a name, Adriana, over and over, until she lost consciousness. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Emily felt like she was falling into an abyss. There's more, Margaret continued reluctantly. Dr. Ramirez noted some things that bothered him. Isabella's pupils were dilated. Her speech was slurred before she lost consciousness. He ordered a toxicology screen. And that's just it. The results never came back. Or if they did, they disappeared from her file. Dr. Ramirez tried to follow up, but he was told the family had requested no further investigation. What family? Emily demanded. We never requested anything like that. Margaret's eyes were sad but knowing. Not our family, mija. The family with enough money and influence to make inconvenient questions disappear. Richard's phone buzzed again. Another text from Adriana. Time's up, darling. Either Emily meets with me tonight, or more people start getting hurt. He showed the message to Emily, whose face went white. She's threatening us, Emily whispered. And she's not done, Richard said grimly. Which means we need to find out what really happened to Isabella before Adriana decides we know too much. Outside, storm clouds were gathering again, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were all walking deeper into danger with every revelation. But now it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about Chloe, about Margaret, about the truth that someone had killed to keep buried. The war for the truth about Isabella Carter's death was just beginning, and Emily was starting to realize that the enemy had been playing this game much longer than any of them had suspected. The meeting with Adriana was set for 8 p.m. at her private office in the Collins building downtown. Neutral territory, she'd insisted. Though Emily suspected nothing involving Adriana could truly be called neutral. Richard had wanted to come with her. But Adriana had been specific. Emily alone, or no meeting at all. Now, as Emily sat in the opulent waiting area outside Adriana's office, she tried to calm her racing heart. The investigator's report was burning a hole in her purse. James Mitchell had worked fast, and what he'd discovered about Isabella's death was even more disturbing than they'd feared. The toxicology report that had mysteriously disappeared. Mitchell had found a copy in Dr. Ramirez's personal files. Isabella hadn't just been in a car accident. She'd been poisoned. Traces of oleander, a beautiful but deadly plant that grew wild throughout Florida, had been found in her system, enough to cause disorientation, confusion, and eventually unconsciousness. Someone had tried to kill Isabella before she ever got in that car. Mrs. Whitmore will see you now, the secretary announced, and Emily's stomach clenched. Adriana's office was a monument to power and intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Miami's skyline, while the walls were lined with photographs of Adriana meeting presidents, celebrities, and business moguls. The woman herself sat behind a massive mahogany desk, looking every inch the queen of her domain. Emily, dear, please, sit down. Adriana's smile was perfectly polite and completely cold. Can I offer you anything? Coffee, water. No, thank you. Emily remained standing, every instinct telling her not to show weakness. You said you had information about my mother. Straight to business. I admire that. Adriana opened a leather portfolio on her desk. I suppose there's no point in dancing around the truth anymore. Yes, I knew about Isabella's attempts to contact Richard. And yes, I made sure those attempts failed. The casual admission hit Emily like a physical blow. Why? Because I was protecting my family. Richard was young and romantic, and completely unsuited to making rational decisions about his future. If he'd known about the pregnancy, he would have thrown away everything: his family's financial security, his own future, our children's inheritance. For what? A momentary infatuation with a working-class girl? Emily's hands clenched into fists. That working-class girl was my mother, and she was worth 100 of you. Perhaps, but worth and reality are two very different things. Adriana pulled out a thick folder. I had Isabella investigated thoroughly when I learned of her attempts to contact Richard. Did you know your mother had a history of depression? That she'd been prescribed antidepressants multiple times? She was sad because the man she loved abandoned her while she was pregnant. Or she was unstable. The police certainly thought so when they found her car wrapped around that tree. Adriana's voice was silk over steel. Tragic, really. A single mother overwhelmed by the pressures of raising a child alone, struggling financially, probably seeing no way out. You're lying. But Emily's voice lacked conviction, and they both knew it. Am I? Tell me, Emily. What do you really know about the night your mother died? According to my sources, she'd been acting erratically for weeks, calling Richard's office obsessively, showing up at places where she thought she might run into him. Some might call that stalking. Emily felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. My mother wasn't a stalker. She was trying to tell Richard about me. And when those attempts failed, she became desperate, depressed, maybe even suicidal. Adriana leaned back in her chair, her expression almost sympathetic. I'm sorry, dear, but sometimes the truth is ugly. The truth is that someone poisoned her, Emily snapped, her composure finally cracking. We found the toxicology report you thought had disappeared. Isabella had oleander in her system the night she died. For just a moment, Adriana's mask slipped. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, fear, but she recovered quickly. How interesting. And you think I poisoned her? I think you had her killed. Adriana laughed, a sound like breaking glass. My dear child, you've been watching too many soap operas. If I wanted Isabella gone, there were much simpler ways to accomplish that. A restraining order, for instance, or simply having her arrested for harassment. Then who? Perhaps you should ask yourself who else had access to Isabella the night she died. Who else knew her schedule, her routines, her weaknesses? Adriana's smile turned predatory. Who else might have felt threatened by her sudden determination to contact Richard? Emily's mind raced. I don't understand. Don't you think, Emily? Who in my family would have been most threatened by the idea of Richard having another child? Someone who stood to lose a great deal if Richard's affections were divided. The implication hit Emily like a sledgehammer. Patrick. Patrick was only 9 years old when your mother died, but he was already showing signs of instability, obsessive behaviors, violent outbursts when he didn't get his way, and he adored his father, worshipped him. Really? Emily felt sick. You're saying a 9-year-old boy murdered my mother. I'm saying a 9-year-old boy heard his mother talking about a woman who was threatening their family's security. And he decided to do something about it. Adriana's voice was matter of fact, as if discussing the weather. Children can be surprisingly resourceful when they want to protect what's theirs. That's insane. Is it? Patrick knew about oleander because of his school science project that year. He was studying poisonous plants native to Florida. He knew Isabella's schedule because I'd had her followed, and he had access to her because... Adriana paused dramatically. Because I arranged for him to meet her. Emily's legs gave out, and she collapsed into the chair she'd refused earlier. What? I told Isabella I'd finally convinced Richard to meet with her. All she had to do was come to a specific location at a specific time, and he'd be there waiting. She was so pathetically grateful, so eager to believe that her fairy tale might have a happy ending after all. And instead, she found Patrick, a sweet little boy who offered her a cup of coffee while she waited, coffee that I'd prepared specially for the occasion. Adriana's smile was triumphant now. Isabella never suspected a thing. She thought she was finally going to get her chance to tell Richard about you. Instead, she got a belly full of poison and a one-way trip off Highway 95. Emily couldn't breathe. The room was spinning, and she thought she might vomit. You used your own son. I protected my son, and my family, and myself. Adriana stood up, smoothing her skirt. But Patrick doesn't know, of course. As far as he's concerned, He offered a nice lady some coffee and she left. The poison, the accident, the cover-up afterward. That was all me. You monster. I'm a mother who did what was necessary to protect her children's future. Adriana walked around the desk, her heels clicking on the marble floor. Which brings us to why you're really here. Emily looked up through her tears. What? I'm offering you the same choice I offered your mother 15 years ago. Disappear. Take your daughter and your grandmother and leave Miami. I'll set up a trust fund for you. Enough money to live comfortably somewhere far away from here. All you have to do is forget Richard exists. And if I refuse, Adriana's smile turned arctic, then I'll be forced to reveal the truth about your mother's death. The real truth about how she was so unstable that she committed suicide by poisoning herself, leaving behind a daughter who inherited her mental illness. About how that daughter has now become obsessed with my husband, just like her mother was. About how dangerous you are to my family. Emily stood on shaking legs. No one will believe you, won't they? I have influence, Emily, money, connections, power. I can make your life very difficult, and not just yours. Your daughter's too. What kind of future do you think little Chloe will have when everyone believes her mother is a mentally unstable stalker? The threat to Chloe was the final straw. Emily felt something crystallize inside her, turning her fear into cold, hard determination. You made one mistake, Emily said quietly. And what's that? You told me the truth. Now I know exactly what you're capable of. Emily headed for the door, then turned back. And I'm going to make sure everyone else knows too. Adriana's laughter followed her out into the hallway, but Emily could hear the edge of desperation in it now. The truth was finally coming to light, and no amount of money or influence could stop it. The war was far from over, but the battlefield had just shifted dramatically in Emily's favor. Emily burst through the doors of Richard's penthouse apartment, like a woman possessed, her face pale and her hands shaking. Richard took one look at her and immediately poured her a scotch from his bar cart. What did she tell you? He asked. Guiding her to his leather couch, Emily's words tumbled out in a rush. Adriana's confession about intercepting Isabella's calls, the setup at the meeting location, the oleander-laced coffee, and most horrifying of all, the implication that 9-year-old Patrick had been an unwitting accomplice to murder. Jesus Christ, Richard breathed when she finished. My own wife used our son as a weapon. Where is Patrick now? Emily asked, finally accepting the scotch and taking a large gulp. Upstairs in his old room. He's been staying here since Constance told him about the investigation into Isabella's death. He's been having panic attacks, nightmares. Richard's voice trailed off as the implications hit him. Oh God, what if he remembers? Before Emily could respond, they heard footsteps on the marble staircase. Patrick appeared, looking haggard and pale, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. Behind him came Constance, concern written all over her face. Dad, we need to talk, Patrick said, his voice strained. I've been having these dreams, these memories, ever since Emily showed up. It's like something's been unlocked in my head. Richard exchanged a worried glance with Emily. What kind of memories? Patrick sank into an armchair, his hands trembling. There was a woman, a pretty lady with dark hair and sad eyes. I was supposed to give her coffee and keep her company while she waited for someone. His voice grew quieter. Mom said it was a surprise. A good surprise. Constance moved to sit on the arm of Patrick's chair, her hand gentle on his shoulder. Patrick, you don't have to. No, I do. Patrick looked up at his father with anguished eyes. Because I think I killed someone. The silence in the room was deafening. Emily felt her heart breaking for this man who was finally remembering the terrible thing he'd been made to do as a child. Tell us everything you remember, Richard said gently. Patrick closed his eyes, his face scrunched in concentration. It was a Saturday. Mom had been acting strange all week, making phone calls in her office with the door closed. She kept saying something about taking care of the Isabella problem once and for all. Emily's blood turned to ice at hearing her mother's name spoken so casually in connection with murder. That morning, Mom told me we were going to help Daddy with something important. She said there was a lady who wanted to hurt our family, but we could stop her. All I had to do was be nice to her and give her some special coffee that would make her sleepy, so the grown-ups could talk to her. Richard's face had gone ashen. Patrick, I thought I was being a hero. Patrick continued, tears starting to flow. Mom made it sound like we were protecting you, Dad. She said the lady was trying to take you away from us, and if we didn't stop her, our family would be destroyed. Constance was crying now too, her arms wrapped around her brother. You were just a little boy. You didn't know. But I should have known. Patrick's voice cracked. When the lady drank the coffee, she started acting funny. She got confused, kept asking where you were, Dad. She said she felt sick. And I just watched her stumble out to her car because Mom told me to. Emily had to grip the arm of the couch to keep from collapsing. This was her mother's final moments, seen through the eyes of the child who'd been manipulated into poisoning her. She was so sad, Patrick whispered. She kept saying she just wanted to tell someone about her daughter. She said her daughter deserved to know her father. He looked directly at Emily. She was talking about you, wasn't she? Emily nodded, not trusting her voice. I killed your mother. The words came out as a broken whisper. I'm a murderer. No, Emily said firmly, surprising everyone, including herself. You were a victim too. Adriana used you, manipulated you. You were 9 years old, Patrick. 9. But I did it. I gave her the poison. Because your mother lied to you. Because she made you think you were protecting your family. Emily leaned forward, looking Patrick directly in the eyes. My mother wouldn't want you to carry this guilt. She would understand that you were just a child who trusted his mother. Richard had been silent through this exchange. But now he spoke up, his voice heavy with pain. What happened after Isabella left? Patrick wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. Mom and I went home. She told me never to talk about our special mission to anyone, not even you or Constance. She said it was our secret, and if I told anyone, bad things would happen to our family, and you never remembered until now. I think I blocked it out, but lately, especially since Emily came into our lives, I've been having these dreams, and the dreams kept getting clearer. Patrick looked up at his father. Dad, what kind of monster does that make me? It makes you a victim, Richard said firmly. Adriana manipulated a child into committing murder, then made you carry the guilt and trauma of it for 19 years. You're not the monster here, son. She is. Emily felt a strange sense of completion, like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. The truth was horrible, but it was the truth. And in a twisted way, it made sense of so many things. Patrick's sometimes violent outbursts, his obsessive protectiveness of the family, his immediate hostility toward her. There's something else, Patrick said quietly. After the lady left that night, Mom made a phone call. I heard her talking to someone about cleanup and making sure there were no loose ends. She kept saying the name Mitchell, and something about making sure the toxicology report disappeared. Emily's heart skipped. Mitchell, as in Detective Mitchell. I don't know. Maybe I was 9. I didn't understand what she was talking about. Patrick paused. But there was money involved. A lot of money. Richard was already reaching for his phone. We need to call our investigator. If Adriana bribed police officers to cover up Isabella's murder. Dad, Constance said suddenly, her voice strange. Where is Mom right now? They all turned to look at her. In the emotional turmoil of Patrick's confession, they'd forgotten about Adriana entirely. She's at her office, Richard said. Why? Because her car just pulled into the driveway. Through the massive windows facing the front of the penthouse, they could see Adriana's silver Mercedes coming to a stop. She got out of the car slowly, deliberately, and looked up at the building like she knew exactly which window they were watching from. She knows, Emily breathed. She knows Patrick remembered. Richard was already moving toward his safe, pulling out a small recording device. If she's coming here, it's because she's desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. What are you thinking? Emily asked. I'm thinking it's time for Adriana to confess to someone other than you. Richard's smile was grim. And I'm thinking Patrick deserves the chance to confront the woman who stole his childhood and turned him into an unwitting killer. Patrick stood up, his face set with new determination. I want to face her. I want her to admit what she did to me, to Isabella, to all of us. The elevator chimed, indicating that Adriana was on her way up. Emily felt her pulse quicken, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from anticipation. The final confrontation was about to begin, and for the first time since this nightmare started, Emily felt like they had the upper hand. The sound of Adriana's heels clicking across the marble foyer echoed through the penthouse like a countdown to Judgment Day. Richard quickly activated the recording device and slipped it into his shirt pocket, while Emily positioned herself where she could see both the elevator and Patrick, who was standing rigid with nervous energy. "Remember," Richard whispered quickly. "Let her talk. Let her think she's in control." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Adriana stepped out looking immaculate as always. But Emily could see the tension in her shoulders, the tight set of her mouth. This was a woman on the edge. Well, Adriana said, surveying the room. The whole family gathered together. How cozy. Her eyes lingered on Emily with particular venom. "I trust your conversation with me was enlightening, dear." "Very," Emily replied evenly. Adriana moved further into the room, her gaze settling on Patrick. "You look terrible, darling. Have you been sleeping?" Patrick's hands clenched into fists. "I've been remembering." Something flickered across Adriana's face. Fear, quickly masked. "Remembering what?" "Coffee," Patrick said simply. "A sad lady with dark hair, a special mission to protect our family." The color drained from Adriana's face, but she maintained her composure. "I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Patrick stepped closer to his mother, and Emily could see years of suppressed trauma and confusion crystallizing into clarity. "Because I remember everything now, Mom. I remember how you told me that lady wanted to hurt Daddy, how you said I was being a hero by giving her that coffee. Patrick, you're confused. I remember how she got sick." Patrick's voice was rising now, 19 years of buried guilt exploding to the surface. "I remember how she stumbled and couldn't walk straight, and how she kept asking for Dad, and you just told me to let her go." Adriana looked around the room, calculating her options. Even if any of that were true, which it isn't, you were just a child. No one would hold a child responsible for, but I wasn't acting alone, was I? Patrick's voice had gone deadly quiet. "I was following orders. Your orders. You have no proof of any of this." "I have his testimony," Richard said, stepping forward. "And Emily has yours from tonight." Adriana's laugh was sharp and bitter. "The word of a mentally unstable young man against mine, please. Patrick has been in therapy for years, for his violent tendencies and psychological problems. Who's going to believe him?" "I will," Constance said firmly, moving to stand beside her brother. "Because I remember things too, Mom. I remember how you used to talk about the Isabella problem when you thought we weren't listening. I remember you making phone calls about eliminating threats to the family. You were 7 years old. I was old enough to know something was wrong. Old enough to see how you changed after that woman died, how you got satisfied, like you'd won something." Emily watched this family tear itself apart, feeling both heartbroken and vindicated. These weren't monsters. They were victims of Adriana's manipulation, finally seeing the truth about the woman who had controlled their lives for decades. "Let me tell you what I think happened," Richard said, his voice cold and controlled. "I think you found out Isabella was trying to contact me again. I think you decided to end the threat permanently. And I think you used our 9-year-old son to do your dirty work because you knew no one would suspect a child. You can't prove any of that." "Can't I?" Richard pulled out his phone and played a recording, Emily's voice recounting Adriana's confession from earlier that evening. Emily wasn't the only one recording tonight. Adriana's facade finally cracked completely, her face twisted with rage and desperation. "You think you're so clever, don't you? All of you ganging up on me like I'm the villain in this story. But I saved this family." Richard was ready to throw everything away for some nobody nurse and her bastard child. "That bastard child is my daughter," Richard roared. "And she would have destroyed everything we built, the business, our social standing, our children's futures. All of it sacrificed for Richard's misguided sense of nobility." Adriana was pacing now, her composure completely gone. Isabella Carter was nothing, an insignificant little nobody who got pregnant and thought she could trap a Whitmore into marriage. Emily felt her own rage building, but Patrick beat her to it. "She wasn't nothing," he shouted. "She was a person, a mother, and you made me kill her. I made you protect your family by turning me into a murderer." Patrick's voice broke. "Do you have any idea what this has done to me? The nightmares, the guilt? The feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with me. I've spent 19 years thinking I was broken, thinking I was dangerous, and it was all because of what you made me do. Adriana finally seemed to realize the magnitude of what she'd unleashed. Patrick, sweetheart, you have to understand. No. He stepped back from her reaching hand. Don't touch me. Don't ever touch me again. You took my childhood, my innocence, my peace of mind, and you used them as weapons in your sick game. Emily felt tears running down her face as she watched Patrick finally confront the woman who had stolen so much from all of them. This was her mother's son too, in a way, another of Adriana's victims. You want to know the worst part? Patrick continued, his voice now eerily calm. I loved you. I trusted you completely. When you told me we were protecting Dad, I believed you because you were my mother. And mothers don't lie to their children about important things. You were protecting yourself, Constance interjected. You were scared Dad would leave you for Isabella, so you eliminated the competition. And when that wasn't enough, you made sure no one would ever find out the truth. Richard stepped forward, his face hard as granite. Here's what's going to happen. Adriana, you're going to confess to the police about Isabella's murder. You're going to admit to bribing officials to cover it up. And you're going to face the consequences of what you've done. Adriana's laugh was hysterical now. You think I'm going to prison for protecting my family? You think I'm going to let you destroy everything I've worked for? You destroyed it yourself the moment you decided murder was an acceptable solution to your problems, Emily said quietly. Adriana whirled on her, eyes blazing. This is all your fault. If you had just stayed in your place, if you had never come looking for answers, if you had never killed my mother, none of this would have happened. The room fell silent, except for the sound of Adriana's ragged breathing. Finally, she seemed to deflate, the fight going out of her all at once. You have no idea what it was like, she said quietly, watching Richard pine for another woman while I was carrying his children, knowing that he married me for convenience, not love. Isabella represented everything I could never be. Young, beautiful, beloved. She had to be eliminated. So you admit it? Richard said. Adriana looked around the room at the faces of her family. Her husband's disgust, her son's anguish, her daughter's disappointment, and Emily's quiet determination. I admit I protected my family the only way I knew how, she said finally. And I'd do it again. Patrick made a sound like a wounded animal. Mom. No, Adriana said, straightening her shoulders. I won't apologize for doing what was necessary, but I also won't let Patrick carry the guilt for my decisions any longer. She walked to Richard's desk and picked up his landline phone. With steady hands, she dialed 911. I'd like to report a murder, she said when the operator answered. My name is Adriana Collins Whitmore, and 19 years ago, I killed a woman named Isabella Carter. The aftermath of Adriana's confession unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of destruction. Within an hour, Richard's penthouse was swarming with police officers, detectives, and crime scene technicians. Detective James Mitchell, the same investigator Richard had hired, who turned out to be completely clean despite Adriana's earlier implications, took charge of the scene with professional efficiency. Emily sat on Richard's couch, watching as they led Adriana away in handcuffs. Her former mother-in-law's face was a mask of cold dignity, but Emily caught the moment when Adriana's eyes met Patrick's. For just an instant, the mask slipped, and Emily saw something that might have been regret. Patrick, Adriana said as the officers paused near the elevator. I need you to know. Don't. Patrick cut her off, his voice raw. Just don't. There's nothing you can say that will fix this. Adriana nodded slowly, and then she was gone, leaving behind a family in ruins and secrets that had finally seen the light. Detective Mitchell approached Emily with a gentle expression. Ms. Carter, I know this is difficult, but I'm going to need you to come to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement about your mother's case. We'll be reopening the investigation officially. Emily nodded numbly. Will Patrick? Given his age at the time and the circumstances of coercion, the DA's office will likely treat him as a victim rather than a perpetrator, but he'll need to testify about what he remembers. After the police left, the penthouse felt hollow and strange. Patrick had disappeared into his room. Constance was making phone calls to lawyers, and Richard stood at his massive windows looking out at the Miami skyline as if seeing it for the first time. "Are you okay?" Emily asked, joining him at the window. "I keep thinking about all the signs I missed," Richard said quietly. "The way Adriana smiled when she heard about Isabella's death, how she never wanted me to attend the funeral, the way she discouraged me from looking too deeply into the circumstances." He turned to Emily. His eyes red with unshed tears. "I lived with your mother's killer for 19 years. I had children with her. I trusted her to raise those children. You couldn't have known, couldn't I? Or did I just not want to see it because it was easier to believe Isabella had simply disappeared from my life by choice?" Emily placed her hand on his arm. "My mother wouldn't want you to blame yourself. She'd want you to focus on healing the family Adriana damaged." Before Richard could respond, they heard a commotion from upstairs. Constance's voice, raised in alarm, followed by the sound of something crashing. They raced upstairs to find Patrick's room in chaos. Furniture overturned, papers scattered everywhere, and a hole punched in the wall near his desk. Patrick himself sat on the floor in the corner, his knuckles bleeding, staring at nothing. "I called his therapist," Constance said, kneeling beside her brother. "She's on her way over." Emily sat down across from Patrick, studying his face. "Talk to me. How do I live with this?" Patrick's voice was barely a whisper. "How do I wake up every morning knowing I killed someone, that I destroyed a family, the same way my mother would have if she'd survived?" Emily said firmly. "By choosing to do better, by refusing to let the worst moment of your life define who you are." Patrick looked up at her with haunted eyes. "How can you not hate me? Because hating you won't bring my mother back, and because you were a victim too." Emily leaned forward. "Patrick, you were 9 years old. You trusted your mother when she told you to do something. That's what children do. The guilt belongs to Adriana, not to you. But I've been angry for so long. Violent. What if it's in my nature? What if I'm really a killer?" Constance spoke up from beside him. "You're angry because you've been carrying trauma you didn't understand. You're violent because you've been fighting ghosts you couldn't name. That doesn't make you a killer, Patrick. That makes you human." Richard knelt down beside his son. "Do you remember what you said to me when you were 12 and accidentally killed that bird with your baseball?" Patrick's brow furrowed. I cried for hours. I wanted to have a funeral for it." "That's right. You cried because taking a life, even accidentally, hurt your soul. A true killer wouldn't have felt that pain." Richard's voice was gentle but firm. "The boy who cried over a dead sparrow isn't a killer. Son, he's a victim who needs healing." Dr. Sarah Chen, Patrick's longtime therapist, arrived 30 minutes later. She was a small, composed woman in her 50s who took in the scene with experienced eyes. "Patrick," she said calmly, settling into a chair across from him, "I understand you've recovered some difficult memories." For the next 2 hours, Emily watched as Dr. Chen guided Patrick through the trauma he'd been carrying. The session was intense and painful, but Emily could see something shifting in Patrick's demeanor as he spoke. The crushing weight of unnamed guilt was being replaced by a terrible but manageable truth. "The integration of these memories is going to be a process," Dr. Chen explained to the family afterward. "Patrick will need intensive therapy, possibly medication adjustment, and a strong support system. But the fact that he's finally facing the truth is actually a positive step." After Dr. Chen left, they all sat in Richard's living room, emotionally exhausted but somehow lighter. Patrick looked drained but more present than Emily had ever seen him. "I want to visit her grave," Patrick said suddenly. "Isabella's grave. I need to apologize." Emily felt tears spring to her eyes. "You don't need to apologize for anything." "Yes, I do. I need to tell her I'm sorry for what happened to her. And I need to promise her that I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it." Richard reached over and squeezed his son's shoulder. "We'll all go, as a family." The word family hung in the air, strange and new and fragile. Emily looked around at these people, her father, her half-siblings, the remnants of a dynasty built on lies, but perhaps capable of rebuilding on truth. "There's something else," Emily said quietly. "Chloe, she's going to have questions about all this, about why her great-grandmother's house was broken into, why her mother has been acting strange, why there are suddenly new people in her life. What do you want to tell her?" Richard asked. Emily considered. The truth, age appropriate, but the truth. She deserves to know she has a grandfather and aunts. She deserves to know her grandmother Isabella was a good person who died because of someone else's choices. And us? Constance asked. What happens to us now? It was the question they'd all been avoiding. With Adriana facing murder charges, with the family's reputation in ruins, with decades of lies finally exposed, what was left? I don't know, Emily admitted, but I think we figure it out together, all of us as a family. Patrick managed a small smile, the first genuine one Emily had ever seen from him. I'd like that. I'd really like that. Outside, storm clouds that had been gathering all day finally opened up, sending rain cascading against the windows. But inside the penthouse, for the first time in decades, there was something that felt like hope. The storm was far from over, but they would weather it together. 3 weeks after Adriana's arrest, Emily stood in the marble lobby of the Miami-Dade courthouse, her hands trembling as she watched the media circus surrounding the Whitmore family scandal. Headlines screamed about the murder mom and death in high society, but Emily tried to block out the noise. Today was about justice for her mother, not spectacle for strangers. Richard appeared at her elbow, looking haggard but determined. The past weeks had aged him visibly. The constant legal meetings, the media attention, and the weight of learning. His wife was a murderer had taken their toll. Patrick's already inside with his lawyer, Richard said quietly. Are you ready for this? Emily nodded, though she wasn't sure she'd ever be ready to hear her half-brother testify about poisoning their mother. The district attorney had decided to try Adriana for first-degree murder. With Patrick testifying as a key witness rather than a co-defendant, the legal team had been clear. Patrick had been a minor, manipulated by his mother, and would likely face no criminal charges. But legal immunity and emotional healing were two very different things. Inside the courtroom, Emily took her seat in the front row, with Margaret beside her and 8-year-old Chloe safely at school, unaware of the drama unfolding. Across the aisle, she could see Adriana sitting with her defense team, looking every inch the wealthy socialite, even in an orange jumpsuit. Their eyes met briefly, and Emily felt a chill at the complete lack of remorse she saw there. All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Morrison, the bailiff called. The proceedings began with the prosecutor, Assistant DeCarmen Rodriguez, laying out the case against Adriana. The evidence was damning. Emily's recorded conversation, Patrick's recovered memories, the toxicology report that had been buried for 19 years, and financial records showing payments to officials who had helped cover up the crime. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Rodriguez said in her opening statement, this is a case about a woman who decided that murder was an acceptable solution to her personal problems. Adriana Collins Whitmore saw Isabella Carter as a threat to her comfortable life and eliminated her with the calculating precision of a professional assassin. Except she used her own 9-year-old son as the weapon when Patrick was called to testify. Emily's heart broke watching him walk to the witness stand. He'd lost weight in the past weeks, and his usual arrogance had been replaced by a haunted vulnerability. Mr. Whitmore, Rodriguez began gently, I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell the jury about the events of October 15th, 2005. Patrick's voice was steady, but quiet, as he recounted that terrible day. My mother told me we were going to help protect our family from a woman who wanted to hurt us. She said the woman was trying to take my father away, and that if we didn't stop her, our whole family would be destroyed. What did your mother ask you to do? She prepared a cup of coffee and told me to give it to the woman when she arrived. She said it would just make her sleepy so the adults could talk to her. Patrick's voice cracked slightly. I thought I was being a hero. Emily watched the jury's faces as Patrick described giving Isabella the poisoned coffee. Watching her become disoriented and sick, and seeing her stumble to her car, several jurors were crying by the time he finished. Mr. Whitmore, Rodriguez continued, did you know the coffee contained poison? No, I was 9 years old. I trusted my mother completely. Patrick looked directly at Adriana for the first time. She told me I was protecting my family. The defense attorney, a sharp-eyed man named Jonathan Pierce, tried to poke holes in Patrick's testimony during cross-examination, suggesting his memories might be false or influenced by therapy, but Patrick remained steadfast in his account. Mr. Whitmore, Pierce said, Isn't it true that you've had violent tendencies throughout your life? Anger management issues? Psychological problems? Yes, Patrick answered honestly, because I'd been carrying the trauma of what happened for 19 years without understanding it. My mother made me an unwitting accomplice to murder when I was a child, then made me keep it secret. That kind of psychological damage doesn't just disappear. When Emily was called to testify, she felt her mother's presence strongly as she recounted finding the photograph, learning about Richard's identity, and discovering the truth about Isabella's death. She spoke directly to the jury about her mother's character, her struggles as a single parent, and her determination to tell Richard about his daughter even in the face of repeated rejection. Isabella Carter was not a stalker or a woman seeking financial gain, Emily said firmly. She was a mother who wanted her child to know her father. She died trying to give me the family I deserved. The most dramatic moment came when Adriana herself took the stand. Against her lawyer's advice, she had insisted on testifying in her own defense. Mrs. Collins Whitmore, Pierce began, please tell the jury about your mindset in 2005. Adriana's voice was calm and controlled. I was protecting my family's future. Richard was young and romantic, prone to making decisions with his heart rather than his head. If he had learned about the pregnancy, he would have left me and our children to chase after a fantasy with Isabella Carter. So you felt threatened. I felt responsible. I had 2 young children whose futures depended on their father making sensible choices. Isabella Carter represented chaos and destruction to everything we had built. Rodriguez's cross-examination was devastating. Mrs. Collins, Whitmore, you said you felt responsible for your children's futures. Did that responsibility extend to turning your 9-year-old son into a killer? I protected. Did you or did you not manipulate Patrick into giving Isabella Carter poisoned coffee? Adriana's composure finally cracked. I did what was necessary. You committed premeditated murder and used your own child as the weapon. She was going to destroy everything, Adriana screamed, her mask finally falling away completely. Isabella Carter was nobody, a nurse, a nothing, and she thought she could waltz into our lives and steal everything I had worked for. The courtroom erupted. Judge Morrison called for order, but the damage was done. Adriana had revealed her true nature to the jury, cold, calculating, and utterly without remorse. During closing arguments, Rodriguez was masterful. Adriana Collins Whitmore has shown you exactly who she is, a woman who sees other human beings as obstacles to be eliminated. She murdered Isabella Carter in cold blood, then spent 19 years covering it up while watching the psychological damage she inflicted on her own son. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty of murder in the first degree. Emily felt her knees buckle as the verdict was read. Richard caught her arm, steadying her, while across the courtroom, Adriana showed no emotion at all. During sentencing 2 weeks later, Judge Morrison was unsparing. Mrs. Collins Whitmore, you have shown a complete lack of remorse for your actions. You murdered an innocent woman and psychologically damaged your own child in the process. The court sentences you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As they led Adriana away, she stopped and looked back at Patrick one last time. I'm sorry, she mouthed, and Emily saw her son nod slightly in acknowledgement. Outside the courthouse, the extended family gathered on the steps. Patrick looked lighter somehow, as if a weight he'd carried for decades had finally been lifted. It's over, he said quietly. No, Emily corrected gently. Now it begins. Now we heal. Looking around at Richard, Constance, and Patrick, her father and siblings, damaged but determined to rebuild, Emily felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. 6 months later, Emily stood in the garden of Isabella's memorial, watching her 8-year-old daughter Chloe place fresh flowers on the headstone. The little girl had taken the truth about her grandmother's death with the resilience that children often possess, asking practical questions like, is the bad lady in jail forever? And, does this mean Grandpa Richard is really my grandpa? Tell me about Grandma Isabella again, Chloe said, settling cross-legged on the grass beside the grave marker that now read, Isabella Marie Carter, beloved mother, daughter, and nurse. Her love lives on in her family. Emily smiled, kneeling beside her daughter. Well, she was the strongest woman I ever knew. She worked 3 jobs to take care of me and great-grandma Margaret, but she always made time for bedtime stories and singing lullabies. The Spanish ones you sing to me, The very same ones. She learned them from her grandmother, just like I learned them from her. And someday you'll sing them to your children. Richard approached quietly, carrying a small potted gardenia plant. Over the past months, he'd visited Isabella's grave weekly, sometimes alone, sometimes with Emily and Chloe. Today marked exactly 20 years since Isabella's death, and he'd wanted to plant something permanent. She would have loved this spot, he said softly, looking around at the peaceful garden setting. They'd moved Isabella from the modest cemetery where she'd originally been buried to this beautiful memorial park, where she rested under a sprawling oak tree with a view of the water. "Grandpa Richard, will you tell me the story about you and Grandma Isabella again?" Chloe asked, accepting his presence in their lives with the easy adaptability of childhood. Richard's face softened. Being called Grandpa still brought tears to his eyes every time. "Which part do you want to hear? The part where you met at college and fell in love?" As Richard began recounting the story of his courtship with Isabella, Emily marveled at how much had changed. The bitter, distant businessman she'd cleaned up after for 2 years had been replaced by a grandfather who carried photos of Chloe in his wallet and never missed a school play or soccer game. "There you are," came Constance's voice from behind them. Emily turned to see her half-sister approaching with Patrick, both carrying grocery bags and looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen them. The family dinners had become a weekly tradition, rotating between Emily's modest apartment, Richard's penthouse, and Constance's new condo. It was still awkward sometimes. They were essentially strangers learning to be a family, but it was working. Patrick looked better than he had in months. The intensive therapy sessions with Dr. Chen had helped him process his trauma, and he'd started doing volunteer work at a crisis center for children, turning the worst thing that happened to me into something that might help other kids. He'd explained to Emily, "It feels like the right way to honor Isabella's memory. How's the community service going?" Emily asked him as they walked back toward their cars. Patrick was serving 200 hours of community service as part of a plea agreement, not for Isabella's death, but for his role in covering up evidence afterward. He'd chosen to work with at-risk youth, and Emily had been amazed to see how good he was with troubled kids. "Good, really good, actually. There's this kid, Marcus, who reminds me a lot of myself at that age, angry, confused, feeling like something's fundamentally wrong with him." Patrick paused. Being able to tell him that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you isn't your fault. "It helps both of us, I think." They reached the parking area where Margaret waited in Richard's car. At 76, Emily's grandmother was slowing down, but her mind remained sharp, and she'd become the unofficial family historian, regaling Chloe with stories about Isabella's childhood and teaching her to cook traditional Mexican dishes. "How are you feeling about everything?" Constance asked Emily as they loaded the groceries into Richard's Mercedes. Tonight was Emily's turn to host dinner, and Constance had insisted on bringing ingredients for Isabella's favorite meal, chicken mole with homemade tortillas. Emily considered the question. 6 months ago, she'd been a struggling single mother, cleaning offices for minimum wage, with no idea who her father was or how her mother had really died. Now she was part of a complicated but loving family, had started taking night classes toward her nursing degree, inspired by her mother's career, and most importantly, had found peace with the past. "Good," she said finally. "Different, but good." The apartment Emily shared with Margaret and Chloe looked tiny compared to the Whitmore properties, but it was home. Richard had offered to buy them a house, set up trust funds, give them access to the family wealth. But Emily had insisted on earning her own way. She'd accepted help with Margaret's medical bills and Chloe's education, but she wanted to build her new life on her own terms. As they gathered around Emily's small dining table that evening, passing dishes of mole and sharing stories about their week, Emily felt Isabella's presence strongly. This was what her mother had wanted: family, connection, love that transcended social class and past hurts. "I have some news," Richard announced during dessert. The foundation paperwork went through. The Isabella Carter Foundation for Single Mothers will officially launch next month. Emily felt tears prick her eyes. Richard had insisted on creating a charitable foundation in Isabella's memory, providing scholarships and support services for single mothers pursuing healthcare careers. It felt like the perfect way to honor her mother's legacy. "And," Constance added with a grin, "I've been accepted to the nursing program at Miami-Dade. Figured it was time I did something meaningful with my life, instead of just spending Dad's money on designer clothes. "That's wonderful," Emily said, meaning it. The relationship with Constance had been the easiest to develop. They shared similar temperaments and had bonded over their shared experience of growing up with complicated family dynamics. After dinner, as they cleaned dishes together, Patrick approached Emily hesitantly. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think Isabella would be proud of who I'm becoming? I know that sounds stupid, considering what I did to her." "Stop." Emily turned to face him fully. "Patrick, my mother was a nurse. She spent her life helping people heal from trauma and pain. If she could see you now, working with kids who are hurting, building relationships with the family you thought you'd lost, choosing forgiveness over anger, she would be incredibly proud." Patrick's eyes filled with tears. "I still dream about her sometimes, but now, instead of nightmares, they're peaceful, like she's telling me it's okay to move forward. It is okay. We all need to move forward." Later that evening, after everyone had gone home and Chloe was asleep, Emily sat on her small balcony with a cup of tea, looking out at the Miami skyline. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Thank you for giving me a second chance at being a father, and for showing Patrick that forgiveness is possible. Isabella would be so proud of the woman you've become." Emily smiled, typing back, "Thank you for being the father she always said you were. See you Sunday for Chloe's soccer game." As she prepared for bed, Emily stopped by Chloe's room to check on her daughter. The little girl was fast asleep, clutching a photo taken at dinner tonight. 4 generations of family gathered around Emily's table, laughing and sharing stories. It wasn't the family Emily had imagined when she was growing up, but it was theirs, built on truth instead of lies, forgiveness instead of revenge, hope instead of bitterness. Isabella Carter's love had finally brought them all home.